Hello, this is Gail Keys from 40 Music Productions, and today we are filming with Dr. Nell Gibson, the author of the memoir Too Proud to Bend, A Journey of a Civil Rights Foot Soldier. Too Proud to Bend was published in 2015, and you can purchase it wherever you buy your books. We are honored to sit down with this remarkable voice in the struggle for justice and liberation, with a woman whose life's work has stretched from the segregated South to the front lines of global activism. Dr. Nell Braxton Gibson was raised on the campuses of historically Black colleges across Texas, Florida, and Mississippi, where her early experiences included a childhood friendship with the legendary Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. Dr. Bethune helped shape Dr. Gibson's lifelong commitments to social justice. She came of age in the shadow of racial terror, and her encounters with civil rights icons like Medgar Evers, as well as the tragic murder of Emmett Till, only deepened that resolve. As a student at Spelman College, she became an active participant in the civil rights movement, organizing, marching, and even being jailed for protesting. Her passion would eventually lead her to East Africa and later into leadership within the Episcopal Church, where she challenged systems of oppression from within with Dr. Desmond Tutu. Whether demanding reparations, standing against apartheid, or helping shape the moral conscience of institutions, Dr. Gibson has remained a tireless advocate for equality, faith, and human dignity, and we are proud to have you here with us on Hidden Gems. We first want to thank you, Dr. Gibson, for coming and taking time out with us today to speak with us about your journey as it pertains to the civil rights in America. So first, I'd like to ask you how it was growing up in the segregated South.
Well, parts of it were difficult. We knew that we lived apart from white people, and we knew that the world they occupied was different from ours, and that it had more in it. There were more things to do, and I think especially for children, we realized that there were more fun, what we thought were fun things for them to do. On the other hand, my life was filled with the culture of Black people, of Black history, and so much so that we took it for granted. We were learning so much about who we were descended from and where we came from and the contributions Black people had made to the country and to the world. And so it was enriched by people like Medgar Evers and Mary McLeod Bethune. What child doesn't have, what other children have people like that they can sit at the feet of and listen to and learn from. So it was, in that sense, a very beautiful and enriching childhood.
So you mentioned Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. What was your experience with her?
Well, she was still alive when I was like 9, my sister was 7, and my parents were teachers at Bethune-Cookman College. She was also a friend of my grandparents, specifically my grandfather, Jesse O. Thomas, who founded the Atlanta University School of Social Work. So they had both founded schools that are still in existence to this day. And the fact that she knew him made her very open to spending time with us. And it was almost like having another grandparent, because we would go and have lemonade and cookies with her on her front porch, and she talked to us about her childhood and about how she founded the school. And it was a very enriching experience. And we knew that she was known throughout the country and throughout the world. But as children that young, we didn't really understand what a great person she was until we had gotten some perspective on her and our time with her. So one of the things I remember about Mrs. Bethune is that when she started her school, she only had 5 little girls and her son, Albert, who was an only child. And she founded the school on what was then a dump heap. And she sold pies and collected coins for those pies in order to have the money to buy that dump heap piece of land. She discovered that Proctor from Procter & Gamble used to come to Daytona Beach to in the winter, what they call snowbirds. They would come from the Northeast and spend time where it was warm in Daytona Beach. And so she approached him. She found out where he was going to be staying, and she went there and asked him to invest in her school. And he said, well, let me see this school. So she brought him out to what was then, as I said, considered a dump heap. And he said, you want me to invest in something that doesn't exist? Where is this school of yours? I thought there was a school. And she said, it's in my mind and in my soul.
It's amazing.
And he was so taken aback that he invested. He gave her money to help start the school.
Amazing.
So one of my favorite memories of Mrs. Bethune is the day that Eleanor Roosevelt was invited to speak in Daytona Beach. And a group of white people had invited her to come and speak. And Mrs. Roosevelt had accepted the invitation. Mrs. Bethune found out about it and found out that there weren't going to be any black people, that it was going to be a segregated audience that Mrs. Roosevelt was speaking to, only white people. And so Mrs. Bethune got in a car, got to the airport early to meet Mrs. Roosevelt's plane, met her, and told her what the situation was, that there weren't going to be any black people. And so Mrs. Roosevelt, when the second car came, the car that from the hosting organization came, Mrs. Roosevelt said she hadn't realized that it wasn't going to be an integrated audience, and so she was not going to speak there. And she got in the car with Mrs. Bethune, and they left the airport together. And somehow word got out at Bethune-Cookman, and the main thoroughfare in the black community was 2nd Avenue, and 2nd Avenue ran right through the middle of Bethune-Cookman College. And so the word got out that Mrs. Bethune had picked Mrs. Roosevelt up at the airport. And so there was this impromptu parade.
Amazing.
Suddenly, with the band.
Wow.
With the Bethune band. And people, in the black neighborhood lined up on both sides of the street. And somehow, I don't know how they ended up in a convertible, but they ended up in a convertible with the 2 women riding down the middle of 2nd Avenue. And I remember how impressed I was as a young child to see what we call, our First Lady and the country's First Lady in this open limo waving to people.
And I believe I've seen that picture.
I'm sure.
I didn't know this backstory, but I have seen that picture of them together.
Yes.
In a convertible.
Yes. Yes.
Amazing.
It was a wonderful day.
So she helped encourage you to fight for civil rights. And where did it take you from there?
Well, she encouraged my sister and me to make the world better the way she had made it better for the people who came after her, that we should do the same thing. And so we got involved and got active in a lot of work that we thought would make her proud, even as young children. But it really came to fruition when we went away to college. And my sister got involved in the peace movement and felt that that was one way of keeping her promise to Mrs. Bethune. And I got involved in the civil rights movement as a student at Spelman. And so the way I got into the civil rights movement at Spelman College was that I heard about a little boy who had been taken to Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. And when his mother took him into the emergency room, the black emergency room, it was packed. And she could see that her son was not going to be helped right away, and he needed help right away. And she could look over into the white emergency room, and she saw that there weren't many people there. So she did something totally unprecedented. She ran out of the black emergency room, ran around into the white emergency room, and tried to get help for him there. And they wouldn't help her. And the little boy died. And that just brought back so many memories from my childhood, including the murder of Emmett Till, which had happened about 60 miles from where we lived in Mississippi, and had frightened me as a child, because I began to wonder if white people could just come into a black home and pull a child out of bed and murder that child. And where we lived on the campus in Mississippi, we had a nice backyard, but on the other side of that backyard was a wooded area. And I used to stay awake after Till's murder, just listening to every twig that cracked in that wooded area, wondering if there were white people coming to get me and kill me. And I discovered many years later as an adult that my friends who lived in Mississippi my black friends lived with that same fear of being dragged out of bed and murdered in the middle of the night. So the trauma that left, the childhood trauma that left with all of us was very palpable as we grew up.
Yes. And some of the children you grew up with went on to do, their family members also went on to do great things, like Maynard Jackson, the first black mayor of Atlanta.
Yes. When we visited my maternal grandparents in Atlanta, Georgia, we played with Maynard's younger sisters, Carol Ann and Connie. The Jacksons lived a block away from us. We were on Griffin Street and they were on Sunset Street. And so we spent a lot of time back and forth at one another's homes. And of course, during those times, Maynard was just Carol Ann's teenage brother. But then he grew up and became the first black mayor of Atlanta.
Yeah, did some great things.
Yes, well, when you are forced to live together, I think many of the professional black people lived in the same neighborhoods. And so we all got to know each other, never realizing where the future would take us. But we were all friends during those times.
So tell us a little bit about school, once you got to Spelman, and how civil rights played a role in you being a student.
Well, the civil rights movement was always something I wanted to be involved in. I think part of the reason I didn't get involved in Mississippi was because I didn't live in the dormitory. When I was my first year of college, I went to Tougaloo College in Mississippi, where my dad was a professor and a coach. And so I didn't have the opportunity to live in the dorms where students were planning things like sit-ins and read-ins. The Tougaloo College students planned the first read-in in a white public library in Jackson, Mississippi. Well, I didn't know anything about it because I lived in faculty housing with my parents. And so I just found that very frustrating that I couldn't become involved because I wasn't part of the dorm life.
Yeah.
So when we transferred to Spelman, there was just at the end of the year, I just told my mom, we had been spending, just backtrack a minute, we had been spending our summers in New York at a summer camp. We started out as campers, and it was an integrated camp. And then we became counselors, my sister and I. And it was a hard transition to come from all the freedom in New York to go back into Mississippi and have to sublimate all those feelings of freedom and being able to do what we wanted to do. And I made a remark to my mom along those lines. And so she began to, she talked to my grandparents who lived in Atlanta, Georgia. My mom had gone to Spelman, and so she talked with my grandparents to see if they could get us, my sister and me, into Spelman as well, and she did. And so that's how I actually was able to fulfill the dream of becoming part of the civil rights movement.
Because what happened there?
Well, a friend of mine, we lived in a lot of different places as the jobs got better and better for my dad as a coach and as an athletic director. And one of the places we had lived was Austin, Texas. And a young friend named Jim Murray, whose father was the Episcopal priest at the church we went to in Austin, Jim ended up at Morehouse College. And he was a senior at Morehouse the year that I was a sophomore at Spelman. And he invited me on my first mass march with the civil rights movement. And after that mass march, I went back to Rush Memorial Church, where the headquarters of the Committee on Appeal for Human Rights was, and that was the group I marched with. And I became part of the group that sat and listened to them strategize about what next moves would be. And I just kept going back and spending more and more time there. My closest friend was a young Mennonite woman who was an exchange student from Bethel College. And she and I became close, I think, mainly because the class we were in was a sophomore class, and they had all come together as freshmen. And so, those friendships were already
formed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the two of us were the odd women out because we had come in as sophomores.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And so she was very involved in the civil rights movement at the time. She said she came to Spelman to get involved in civil rights. And so she and I became close friends. And she had been going to Rush Memorial to meet. So with her going there and with my childhood friend Jim telling me about how the meetings were taking place, that's how I actually got involved on the kind of the ground level of making plans.
So, Dr. Gibson, what do you think propelled you as a young person to stand up for civil rights?
Well, one of the things I know that did was my father's friendship with Medgar Evers. They probably were about 10 years apart in age, But Medgar Evers used to come to the house to talk with my father about increasing membership in the NAACP. And so he was pretty much a frequent guest. And I was kind of taken with him because he was in his 30s, and yet he was standing up to white people in Mississippi. And I just felt like it was so brave for a young man, a man that was that young, and who was a Mississippian, who was born in Mississippi, to not be afraid. Yes. And so whenever he came out to Tougaloo, which was then not a part of Jackson, it is now, Jackson has grown towards Tougaloo, and it is a part of Jackson. But at that time, to have driven, at that point, 10 miles away from Jackson, north to Tougaloo, to speak. And so I was fascinated, and I used to, whenever he spoke, I would find out where he was going to speak, and I would go listen to him, because I couldn't believe there was a black man that young who, all alone, basically, was standing up to white people in Mississippi and encouraging other black people to do the same. So I became a real follower of what he was doing, and I was extremely impressed by it.
That's amazing. Were there any other incidents that helped shape your feelings toward the civil rights movement?
Well, he certainly did, because I saw what one person could do. The other thing, my generation, in some places, has been referred to as the Emmett Till generation, because we were all around the same age Emmett Till was when he was murdered, 13, 14, and we became the ones who grew up and became leaders of the civil rights movement once we got to college. That was almost like the impetus for the student movement that took place on various college campuses, led by those of us who were part of what sometimes is referred to as the Emmett Till generation.
And so his murder, how did it affect you emotionally? Did it make you afraid, or?
It did. It did make me afraid. And there were people I talk to now who are from my generation, who grew up in Mississippi, who said they were afraid too. We were all, I can't say all, because my sister said she wasn't, because she felt my father could protect her from anything. But there were most of us who felt, or many of us who felt, who wondered if we could also be dragged out of our bed and murdered the way he was. And it struck a fear in a lot of us. I mean, it created a childhood trauma that we still live with as adults, that one murder.
That one murder, isn't that sad?
Yes.
Okay.
So when I was in Atlanta at Spelman, I remember hearing about a young boy whose mother had rushed him into Grady Memorial Hospital for emergency treatment, and the black emergency room was filled, and she realized that if she had to wait for the people who were already there to get seen, that her child was going to die. And so she could see over into the white emergency room and see there were very few people compared to the black emergency room. And so she went out and rushed into the white side, begging for help for her child, and they wouldn't take him. They told her to go back where she belonged on the black side, and the little boy died. And when I heard about that, I became part of the group of students from the Atlanta University complex, all black colleges, part of that group that went down every day to demonstrate in front of the hospital and at times to go inside and just sit. We would try to go inside at the times when the emergency room wasn't filled, so that we wouldn't get in the way of people who really needed emergency care. But if the emergency room was more or less empty, we would go and sit in there while others marched outside. And sometimes we'd take turns. Those who got really tired in the heat of marching outside would trade places with some of those who were inside.
And what group was that you demonstrated with?
I demonstrated with a group called the Committee on Appeal for Human Rights. And two of the founders of that organization, it had been founded a year or so before I got there. And it was two of the members who founded it were Julian Bond and Marion Wright Edelman. By the time I got to Spelman, Marion Wright Edelman had graduated. But she and Julian were two of the people who founded the Committee on Appeal for Human Rights.
How did you ultimately meet or be able to demonstrate your civil rights activism after you left college?
Well, I don't think it ever really ended. Just a few years after I left college, I got married to Bert Gibson, moved to New York, where he was living, and we staged a demonstration at the church where we were attending. Members of the Black and Brown Caucus at St. Mark's Church in the Bowery got up one Sunday morning and demanded that we be fully accepted the same way white people were accepted in the church, that there weren't just a few of us who came to worship, but we wanted to be fully integrated as members of the vestry, as members of committees, as members of choirs, as associates, that we wanted a black arts project to a black and brown arts project to work alongside the white arts project that was there. And so we did a lot to upset that church and also to change it into what it has become, which is a very pluralistic church. It's much more than integrated. It's really a pluralistic church with a number of people from all walks of life and from all cultures and ethnic groups with leadership positions in that church. And that is how we continued the work that I was doing early on in New York. And we've been members of that church almost 60 years. We are now the elders of the church.
It's so nice.
But we're still very much involved in making sure that it is a welcoming place for all kinds of people.
I know you've been to Africa several times, Dr. Gibson. So how did that all start?
Well, my first trip to Africa started when I was in college. I was a member of Trinity Cathedral Church in Sacramento, California, and 3 members of our congregation were sent to Africa to help build an Anglican seminary, to work with other students from across the country. We came furthest from California, but there were students from all over the country, about 15 or so of us, who met for a slight orientation in New York, and then we were off to what was then called Tanganyika, it's now called Tanzania, to build an Anglican seminary there. And the seminary is still standing and going strong in Dodoma, Tanzania. So that was my first trip. And I fell in love with Africa. It was the first place I had ever been where I was loved because of the color of my skin. Mm-hmm. And I had grown up in a segregated South where I had been hated because of the color of my skin. And it was such a liberating experience that I promised myself that one day I was going to take my whole family to have that kind of experience, which I actually ended up doing in 1987, taking my children, my husband, and my parents. And the 3 generations of us spent time in Africa. So I remember distinctly the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church sending 3 of us, a bishop, a priest, and a layperson, and I was the layperson, to South Africa to work with Archbishop Desmond Tutu on a 5-year plan to dismantle apartheid. And so we would have these experiences where we would be sent, before we got, let me just backtrack a minute and say, everyone who came from around the world to work on this 5-year plan first was sent to live with people in South Africa and Namibia and Mozambique, all of the countries that were affected by apartheid, to experience it before we came together to talk about dismantling it, so that we would have first-hand knowledge of what we were talking about. And so we did. And so I spent part of my time in Namibia and part of my time in Johannesburg. I was one of 3, as I said, sent from this country. And then we all, after we had those experiences, came together at Mudaport, which was like a large conference center, to share the experiences that we had with everyone else, and then to sit down and try to figure out how to dismantle apartheid. But we would meet in different committees, and we'd come together at lunchtime, because breakfast was silent. We would get up in the morning and we would have a silent morning where nobody said anything to anyone, and we would eat breakfast in silence. And then we would start with the work of the committee. And so the noonday was our time to get together and have a noonday prayer before we had lunch. And different people led the noonday prayers. And so one day it became my day to lead noonday prayers. And the day before, Archbishop Tutu had spoken at the noonday prayers, and he had talked about little boys who had been killed, little black boys who had been killed by white soldiers who were part of the apartheid regime, and how their mother had cried what Archbishop Tutu, whom we call the Arch, said the mother had cried dry tears, and that just stuck with me. And so the next day, when it came time to offer noonday prayers, I referred to the story he had told about these 2 little boys who had been brought dead to their mother, who had been murdered. And it had occurred to me how children are the collateral damage of all the wars that adults make and perpetuate. And so my prayer was for the children who have nothing to do with any of this, who as 18-year-olds have guns shoved in their hands and are sent off to war, to fight these wars that adults have started, that these kids know nothing about. And children who are much younger, who, like these kids, are murdered for no apparent reason. And so I began my noonday prayer was about the children, and about how the children around the world, and I named all the places that were at war, where children were dying because adults could not get along with each other. And as I was speaking, going into these noonday prayers, the arch started to weep. And I continued on with the prayers. And then when I had finished, someone came up to me and said, "The arch wants you to sit at his table for lunch today." And that was the beginning of our friendship that just grew from there, and we became very close personal friends.
That's so lovely. So, Dr. Gibson, can you tell us about the connection between your grandparents and Booker T. Washington?
Yes, they were both students at different times during the time that Booker T. Washington was president. And my grandfather was ahead of my grandmother by several years, but he was a great orator. And so he became one of Tuskegee's fundraisers, because he'd go around making speeches all over the country about Tuskegee. And he was the second greatest fundraiser for Tuskegee, only behind Booker T. Washington himself.
And what was his name?
His name was Jesse O. Thomas. And he was also the founder of the Atlanta University School of Social Work, because he discovered that people, because there wasn't a school of social work in Atlanta, people would go away and get their degree and stay where they were. They'd be offered jobs there. Those people needed black social workers. And so he founded the Atlanta University Social Work to keep black social workers from Georgia in Georgia.
Because otherwise they would go to schools in northern, in the northern cities.
And stay. They'd be offered jobs there in those northern cities.
And how does Tuskegee play a role in your family's life today?
Well, my daughter graduated from Duke University, but always knew from the age of 4 that she wanted to be a veterinarian. She went to an elementary school called Manhattan Country School, which had a farm. And so she got a chance to work with animals. The farming was part of the school curriculum as well. And she said the first time she held a newborn lamb in her arms, that cemented it. She knew that that's really what she wanted to do. And so, and she knew her parents had gone, her great-grandparents, had gone to Tuskegee, and that on my grandfather, her great-grandfather's return trips to Tuskegee, he met my grandmother, who was a student. So she knew that her great-grandparents had met there. And so that was the school she decided that she wanted to go to to get her veterinary degree. The other thing I remember about Tuskegee University is that during the polio epidemic, the 1940s and 50s, my sister, my younger sister Rosemary, was one of those children who at age 4 who fell victim to polio. And the only doctor in the country, he was a black doctor, who worked with children who had polio, was at Tuskegee University. And I remember my sister got polio while we were visiting my grandparents in Atlanta, Georgia. And my grandmother drove our family from Atlanta to Tuskegee to meet with this doctor to see what he could do to help my sister with her bout with polio.
That's amazing. We want to thank you for spending this time with us today. It was truly a labor of love and unforgettable. And we hope to see you soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
All right, thank you.